بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
On the 10th of Muharram, in the 61st year after the Hijrah, 10th October 680 CE, a crime was committed that shook both the heavens and the earth. The beloved grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, Husayn ibn Ali, may Allah be pleased with him, was martyred on the plains of Karbala. He had been denied water for 3 days, his companions and family members were cut down before his eyes, his infant son was killed by an arrow while cradled in his arms, and then, after a brief truce for prayer had been granted and violated in the same breath, his blessed head was severed from his body and raised on a spear. The tragedy of Karbala is a wound the Ummah still carries, 14 centuries later. But across the span of those centuries, a question has persisted and refuses to be silenced. What became of the men who did this? Did they escape? Did they die peacefully in their beds, honored and attended, their consciences undisturbed? Or did the justice of Allah pursue them even in this world, before the ultimate reckoning that waits for every soul in the hereafter? This account will answer that question. We will name the primary killers, trace the manner of their ends as recorded by the historians, and extract the lesson that has echoed through 14 centuries, that to dishonor the Ahl al-Bayt is to invite a ruin from which there is no true escape, in this life and the next. The martyrdom of Husayn was not the act of a single hand moved by a single impulse. It was a chain of command stretching from a palace in Damascus, through a governor's mansion in Kufa, down to the burning, bloodied sand of Karbala. The Islamic historical tradition preserves for us the names of those most directly responsible, not for their honor, but because accountability requires that guilt be named clearly, and because the pattern of their subsequent deaths carries lessons that the tradition has not permitted to be forgotten. The historians identify 7 men whose roles were so central to the massacre, as architects, commanders, and the direct instruments of the killing, that their names have been preserved with the weight of infamy rather than honor. At the very summit of the chain stands Yazid ibn Muawiyah, the Umayyad caliph seated in Damascus. Before proceeding, it is important to state clearly what the Islamic tradition consistently maintains. Yazid's father, Amir Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, may Allah be pleased with him, was a companion of the Prophet and a scribe of the Quranic revelation. He is accorded the honor due to the companions of the Prophet. The Muslim scholarly tradition distinguishes the father from the son, and that distinction must be maintained here. Yazid, however, was a man of a different character. When he assumed the caliphate upon his father's death in 60 AH, his first directive was an instruction to the governor of Medina: compel Husayn ibn Ali, along with Abdullah ibn Umar and Abdullah ibn al-Jubair, to pledge allegiance to him. If Husayn refuses, send his head. This was the command from which everything else flowed. Yazid appointed Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad as governor of Kufa, a man whose ruthlessness he knew, and provided the political authority under which the massacre was planned and executed. He rewarded the killers after it was done. The ultimate responsibility for what happened at Karbala rests with him. Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad was the governor of Kufa and the tactical mind behind the massacre. It was he who gave every operational order: intercept Husayn on the road, block access to water, reject all compromises including Husayn's proposals to return to Medina or to present himself directly to Yazid, and launch the final assault when negotiation had served its purpose of delay. The suffering of Karbala, the thirst of the children, the systematic elimination of every possibility of resolution, was Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad's design, executed in service of Yazid's political directive. Umar ibn Sa'd was the on-the-ground commander of the Umayyad army at Karbala. He was the son of Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, one of the 10 companions specifically promised paradise by the Prophet, one of the greatest military leaders in early Islamic history, a man of honor and standing in the Ummah. Umar ibn Sa'd carried this lineage and, in the Islamic tradition's judgment, betrayed it entirely. He accepted the command against Husayn in exchange for the promise of the governorship of the Persian province of Rai. It was he who fired the first arrow into Husayn's camp, signaling the commencement of hostilities. It was he who gave the order for the final assault. Shimr was the man who delivered Ibn Ziyad's ultimatum that there would be no compromise and no retreat. He was the one who screamed for the attack to begin on the evening of Tasu'a, the 9th of Muharram, before Husayn's request for a final night of prayer was granted. And when the battle had reduced Husayn to a wounded man alone, it was Shimr who rushed forward, knelt upon the chest of the Prophet's grandson, seized his blessed beard, and severed his head, in the act of prostration in prayer, during a truce that had been agreed for the purpose of allowing worship. Harmala ibn Kahil is remembered in the Islamic tradition for one act above all others. Husayn, holding his 6-month-old son Ali al-Astar, an infant so severely dehydrated that his tongue clung to the roof of his mouth, walked toward the enemy lines. "You have no quarrel with this child," Husayn said, "give him a single drop of water." Harmala's answer was to reach for his bow, draw an arrow, the accounts describe it as triple-pronged, and release it into the throat of the infant. Ali al-Astar was martyred in his father's arms. According to multiple accounts preserved in the historical tradition, Sinan ibn Anas was the man who physically performed the beheading of Husayn, the hand that held the sword against the neck of the Prophet's grandson. He subsequently carried the head as a trophy to Ibn Ziyad. Khawli's role was to transport the blessed head of Husayn from the field of Karbala to the palace of Ibn Ziyad in Kufa. The journey was overnight. He brought the head into his own home, hiding it under a large cooking pot until morning, while his wife slept unaware. When she discovered what her husband had brought into the house, the accounts describe her as a woman who held love for the Ahl al-Bayt in her heart. She recoiled in horror and permanently turned away from him. He then presented the head to Ibn Ziyad the following morning. There were, of course, thousands of soldiers who participated in the events of Karbala. But these 7 were the architects, the decision-makers, and the direct instruments of the killing. Their subsequent fates are recorded by the historians, and what those fates reveal has occupied the attention of Islamic scholars and historians across the centuries. The Quran states, in Surah Al-An'am, verse 132, with quite certainty, and your Lord is not unaware of what they do. And, in Surah Al-Dukhan, verse 59, so wait, indeed, they are waiting. The killers of Karbala did not wait long. Within a few years of the massacre, justice, in the form of Al-Mukhtar al-Thaqafi's uprising in Kufa, dedicated specifically to hunting down those responsible for Husayn's death, had reached most of them. Let us trace, one by one, what the historians record. We begin with the man at the very top of the chain. Yazid's reign lasted only 3 years and a few months after Karbala, a brief, blood-stained period encompassing the massacre of the Prophet's family, the military attack on Medina in the Harra incident of 63 AH, and the Umayyad siege of Makkah itself, during which the Kaaba was struck by catapult fire. He died in 1964 AH in the Syrian village of Huwarin, at approximately 37 or 38 years of age, from illness. Pleurisy is mentioned in some accounts. His own son, Muawiyah II, succeeded him briefly before publicly renouncing the caliphate, reportedly expressing that he was unwilling to bear the weight of his father's and grandfather's errors. He died very shortly afterward, leaving no successor. The Umayyad line continued through a different branch. Yazid's grave in Huwarin, if it has been located at all, is unmarked and ignored by the world. The shrine of Husayn in Karbala draws millions every year who weep, pray, and remember. That contrast, in itself, is the verdict of history. And history, here, has simply reflected the verdict of Allah. The more vivid details associated with Yazid's death in the devotional tradition, that his face darkened, that he was tormented in his final days, that a foul odor accompanied his body, are found in later accounts rather than in al-Tabari's chronicle directly, and should be received with that context in mind. What the early sources confirm, without ambiguity, is that his death was swift, his reign left chaos in its wake, and the name he left behind attracted a depth of censure and condemnation across the Islamic scholarly tradition that has never fully dissipated. Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, the man who designed the atrocity, continued to govern Kufa and Basra with an iron grip after Karbala. But the grief and fury of the Muslim world were building steadily beneath the surface. The first expression of that fury came through the movement known as the Tawwabin, the penitents, led by Sulaiman ibn Surad al-Kuja'i, a companion of the Prophet, who gathered thousands of Kufans consumed by remorse for their abandonment of Husayn. They rose in 65 AH, marched under the banner of revenge for Husayn, and met the Umayyad army in northern Syria. Most of them, including Sulaiman ibn Surad himself, were killed at the Battle of Ayan al-Warda in January 685 CE. But their sacrifice laid the ground for what followed. The second and more decisive expression of that fury came through al-Mukhtar ibn Abi Ubayd al-Thaqafi. Al-Mukhtar had been imprisoned by Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad during the events leading up to Karbala and was released through the intercession of Abd Allah ibn Umar. He rose in Kufa in Rabi, level 66 AH, taking control of the city under the banner of avenging Husayn's blood in the name of Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiya, Ali's son by another wife. His revolt was explicitly and systematically directed at hunting down those responsible for Karbala. Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, who had been expelled from Kufa and Iraq by the population themselves after Yazid's death, was now leading a large Syrian army back toward Iraq to reimpose Umayyad control. Al-Mukhtar dispatched his finest general, Ibrahim ibn al-Ashtar ibn Malik, to meet this force. The two armies clashed at the Khazir River, a tributary of the Great Jab in northern Iraq. In 67 AH the battle was fierce and lasted nearly the entire day. At its conclusion, the Umayyad army was routed. Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad fell in the fighting, killed, according to some accounts, by Ibrahim ibn al-Ashtar personally, and according to others, by a partisan of Ali named Sharik ibn Jadir al-Taghlibi who had sworn an oath to avenge Husayn. Ibrahim ibn al-Ashtar ordered Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad's head severed and the body burned. The head was sent back to al-Mukhtar, who was then in al-Madain. The tradition records that when Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad's head was placed before the assembled gathering in Kufa, those present witnessed a snake emerge, enter the severed mouth, and exit through the nostril, doing this several times. The chroniclers who transmit this detail see in it a symbolic commentary on the man who had ordered water shut off from the throats of the Prophet's grandchildren. This detail is more prominent in the devotional and Maqtal tradition than in the earliest historical chronicles, and is presented here as such. Al-Mukhtar subsequently sent the head to Medina, to what remained of Husayn's family, as a token that justice, however delayed, had not been refused. It arrived some 7 years after Karbala. It is reported that when Husayn's son, Ali Zain al-Abidin, received the news, he prostrated in gratitude. Jafar al-Sadiq, Husayn's great-grandson, is recorded to have said, "The Hashemites did not comb or dye their hair until al-Mukhtar sent us the heads of those who killed al-Husayn." Umar ibn Sa'd was the son of Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, one of the 10 companions given the glad tidings of paradise by the Prophet himself. His father's legacy was one of the most glorious in the history of early Islam, hero of the Battle of Qadisiyah, conqueror of Persia, a man whose arrow the Prophet had called upon Allah to answer. Umar ibn Sa'd could have inherited a name of honor, but he chose greed instead, accepting the command against Husayn in exchange for the governorship of Rai. Yazid never gave him the governorship. After Karbala, Umar ibn Sa'd received nothing he had been promised. He was left with neither the position he had sold his conscience for nor any trace of the honor he had inherited from his father. When al-Mukhtar took Kufa in 66 AH, Umar ibn Sa'd knew what was coming. He fled and went into hiding. Al-Mukhtar hunted him down and had him executed, and his body was burned. Al-Mukhtar declared before those assembled, "This is for Husayn." The musnad of al-Mukhtar's actions is confirmed in al-Tabari's Chronicle and in Ibn Athir's al-Kamil. The son of one of the greatest companions of the Prophet died a disgraced criminal, his body consumed by fire, denied the dignity of a proper burial, carrying the knowledge, in his final moments, that he had received nothing of what he had agreed to destroy Husayn for. Shimr was the enforcer. He delivered the ultimatum that there would be no negotiation. He screamed for the attack to begin on the eve of Tasua. He violated the truce that had been granted for prayer. And when Husayn lay wounded and prostrating in his final devotion, it was Shimr who knelt upon his chest and severed his head. When al-Mukhtar's forces moved against those responsible for Karbala, Shimr fled. He headed for the desert, hoping to reach the safety of the Umayyad court in Damascus. Al-Mukhtar's men, including, by one account, those under a commander specifically tasked with finding him, caught him before he reached safety, and he was killed. The accounts differ on the specific details of his end, but the tradition preserves the image of his body left to the elements, wild dogs among those that came to it. The man who had beheaded the grandson of the Prophet was himself dispatched with the force of those who understood precisely what he had done. Al-Tabari and Ibn Athir both confirm Shimr's execution during al-Mukhtar's campaign. The more vivid details of the aftermath belong to the devotional tradition. Perhaps the most heartrending single act of the day of Ashura was committed by Harmala ibn Kahil. Husayn walked out before the enemy lines carrying his 6-month-old son Ali al-Astar, a child so dehydrated that his tongue had dried and clung to the roof of his small mouth. Husayn raised the infant above his head and called out to the army, "You have no quarrel with this child, give him a single drop of water." Harmala's answer was to reach for his bow. The 3-pronged arrow struck the baby's throat. Ali al-Astar was martyred in his father's arms. Husayn cradled the tiny body, gathered the flowing blood in his cupped hands, and cast it toward the sky as a witness before Allah. When al-Mukhtar's forces captured Harmala, they did not give him a swift end. By the accounts preserved in the Maqtal tradition and transmitted through the Kufa uprising narratives, al-Mukhtar ordered his hands and feet cut off before he was cast into fire. Al-Mukhtar declared, "This is for the infant of Husayn." A man who had used his hands to shoot an infant dead lost those hands before the flames took him in this world, a foretaste of what the Prophet described as the punishment of the fire in the next. Sinan ibn Anas is identified in multiple sources, including the account transmitted through Abu Miknaf and preserved in al-Tabari, as among the most directly responsible for the physical killing of Husayn, specifically, the final strike that preceded or accompanied the beheading. He boasted of it, by some accounts, demanding reward from Ibn Ziyad for what his hands had done. When al-Mukhtar's men came for him, the accounts describe a punishment that mirrored the act. The hands that had raised a blade against Husayn were taken from him. His end was violent and without mercy. The men who carried it out were driven by a grief and fury that had been building since the plains of Karbala. The specifics of his death are recorded more consistently in the devotional literature than in al-Tabari directly. What the mainstream historical sources establish is that the key participants in the killing of Husayn were systematically hunted by al-Mukhtar's campaign, and most of them were found. Khawli's role was to carry the blessed head of Husayn from Karbala to the palace of Ibn Ziyad in Kufa. The journey took him overnight. He brought the head into his own home, placing it beneath a large cooking pot while his wife, a believer in the Ahl al-Bayt, slept nearby. When she discovered what her husband had brought under their roof, she recoiled in horror and refused him from that night forward. The tradition records her words, "You have brought the head of the grandson of the Prophet of Allah into this house?" she turned away from him permanently. When al-Mukhtar's forces surrounded his home, Kavli had nowhere to go. He was killed, and the house that had sheltered the sacred head in the darkness of that overnight was set ablaze. The very dwelling that had served as a stopping point for the head of Husayn became, in the end, the grave of the man who had carried it there. From an Islamic perspective, every soul departs when Allah commands its departure. There is no death without His will. But the manner of these deaths, taken together, carries a weight that the scholars and historians of both the Sunni and Shia traditions have never passed over in silence. These were not ordinary casualties of battle or simple deaths in old age. The killers of Husayn did not, as a general pattern, die rich, respected, and surrounded by those who honored them. They died violently, within a few short years of their crime, at the hands of those who had sworn before Allah to answer Karbala. And in several cases, the manner of the death reflected the nature of the crime with a precision that felt, to those who witnessed it, unmistakably purposeful. The architect who ordered the water cut off died with his body burned and his head sent across the desert as a trophy. The commander who fired the first arrow was hunted from hiding and burned. The man who beheaded Husayn was himself killed and his body given to the elements. The archer who shot the infant was, in the tradition's account, deprived of those hands before being burned. The man who transported the head saw his house become his funeral pyre. The Quran says, in Surah Hud verse 102, "And thus is the Caesar of your Lord when he seizes the cities while they are committing wrong. Indeed, his Caesar is painful and severe." And again, in Surah Al-An'am verse 132, "And for all are degrees for what they have done, and your Lord is not unaware of what they do." And, in Surah Al-Dukhan verse 59, "So wait, indeed, they are waiting." The killers of Karbala did not wait long. Karbala was 61 AH. Ibn Ziyad and Umar ibn Sa'd were dead by 67 AH, 6 years. That was how long the architecture of the massacre lasted before being dismantled by the men who swore to answer it. The Prophet had placed his family under a protection that was not merely sentimental. He had said, "Husayn is from me, and I am from Husayn. May Allah love those who love Husayn." He had warned, 3 times in succession, "I remind you of Allah concerning my Ahl al-Bayt." Scholars who have reflected on these words across the centuries have understood them not as empty sentiment but as a warning with consequences, that the honor of the Ahl al-Bayt is not a matter one treats carelessly. 7 men sat at the top of the chain that murdered Husayn ibn Ali. Yazid gave the order, Ibn Ziyad designed the massacre, Umar commanded the army, Shimr wielded the blade in the act of prostration, Harmala shot the infant, Sinan severed the head, Kavli transported it. Not one of them died peacefully. They were killed in battle, hunted down in hiding, dismembered, burned alive, and left for wild animals. They died within years of their crime, pursued by the consequences of what they had done in this world, before the full reckoning that awaits every soul before Allah. The lesson is written in their blood and in their humiliated ends. The honor of the Ahl al-Bayt is sacred. To violate it is to court destruction, to dishonor the family of the Prophet is to dishonor the Prophet himself, and to dishonor the Prophet is to challenge the one who sent him, a challenge that, as the killers of Karbala discovered in this world, does not go unanswered. The memory of Husayn fills Karbala, fills Medina, fills the hearts of millions who weep for him every Muharram. The names of those who killed him are recorded, not for honor, but as a witness. The graves of the killers are unknown, unvisited, forgotten. The shrine of the martyr draws the world. This is the verdict, this is justice, and what remains of it, the full weight of what they did, awaits them before a Lord who is not unaware of what the wrongdoers do. May Allah fill our hearts with love for the Prophet and his purified family. May He protect us from the path of those who wronged them. May He make us among those who stand with Husayn, not only in words, but in deeds, in principles, and in unwavering commitment to truth and justice. And may He gather us, in the company of the Prophet and his daughter and his grandsons, in the highest gardens of paradise, on the day when no shade will avail except His. Amin, and Allah knows best.